Now, my great pleasure to welcome the 2021 Shakespeare Memorial Lecturer, Janine Watson, to the podium. Janine is an actor and a director. She was the 2016 recipient of the Sandra Bates Directing Award, and her directing credits include Romeo and Juliet for Bell Shakespeare, Unqualified for the Ensemble Theatre, Fierce, Crimes of the Heart, and Dolores for the Old Fitz Theatre. In 2022, Janine will direct Nearer the Gods and Still Unqualified for the Ensemble Theatre and The Comedy of Errors for Bell Shakespeare. It's my great pleasure to welcome Janine tonight, and I hope you enjoy her lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Okay, I have called tonight's lecture, Be Not Afraid of Greatness, a thought experiment in 5 acts, reinterpreting history for the love of an actor in the midst of an outbreak. Act 1, a poor player. I am an actor. I am not an academic. I'm not a woman of letters. I have no place here really in this lofty institution, our civilized society's last bastion of hope to export more than just iron ore, to trade in knowledge and ledger learning. I want to belong here. I want to assert a position of cultural authority. I want you to listen and trust in my empirical evidence, but I have none. This speech will be full of unfillable holes. My research, dubious. I am an actor and I'm going with my gut, trusting my intuition. If you want to stamp behind a name, move on. If you want a mortarboard, I thought it was what builders use to mix the clay to bind their bricks and stack their stone, not silk and cardboard thrown into the air so the hand of God can touch it and ordain with respect the heads of that it lands upon. I am an actor and I'm getting poetic. Next thing you know, I'll start to count my words, then I'll segue swiftly into syllables. I'm neatly starting a pentameter because my soul recognizes rhythm, not my mind, not even my heart, though my heart seeks it out. The rhythm of humanity and how it speaks. Actors are electrocardiograms, human electrocardiograms, detecting your heartbeat and diagnosing your heartache. Sound like a lot? Sound like a vast claim? Sometimes the truth smacks of sentiment, like a cloying wine dragging your taste buds to the pit of unsavory sweetness and leaving you in need of water, hungover with regret. Oh, regret, to not have listened to the deep truth-telling of your soul. And you know who listened? Actors. And I haven't even said his name yet. I haven't even said his name yet. I've spoken of actors, of poetry, of pentameter, of learning, and I'm here in his memory, or to honor it, or perhaps just to be with it. But I haven't mentioned his name, and perhaps I won't. What am I here to say? What am I here to do? Can you believe I'm making it up, except for the paper, as I go along? Did I write anything down? Is there anything on it? The art of the actor and the only true responsibility at the end of the long, long day is to make the audience believe that the writer's words are their own, sprung from the fertile soil of truth and trickling out to quench the audience's thirst for emotional engagement. Can I make you believe right now that I'm making this up? A lecture in his memory. That's how I interpret memorial lecture. Memorial defined as a statue or structure established to remind people of a person or event. Jesus. Commemorative, monument. This is better. Something such as a speech or ceremony that commemorates. And then commemorate, issued in limited quantities for a limited time to honor or feature someone or something. See, I'm an actor and I'm obsessed with language. I'll go to the ends of the earth to understand why I'm saying and doing what I'm saying and doing. And that means digging deep into history for the meaning of words. So I know what I'm doing. In this case, I'm commemorating. I'm an actor. I'm not a fraud. You might think I'm trying to manipulate you when you hear me say something that is simply innately true. And the writer wrote it and they're brilliant, and the director guided the execution and they're brilliant. But the actor has to make you angry at them for suddenly making you feel something you really did not want to feel, or that you didn't know you knew about yourself. I am an actor, and I'll run the great risk of sounding like an idiot to say what I'm about to say in order to say what I have to say, to assert my position here tonight. Actors have to get as close to pain as you can get without living through it. They must make you believe their laughter comes from a really tickled funny bone rather than impeccable technique. They must spit their water in shock enough to make you grimace and kiss hard enough to make you embarrassed and glad you're in the dark. They must take their breaths at exactly the right moment. They must inhale every thought as if for the first time. They must exhale with their whole damn bodies. The word empathy is kicked around flippantly, like a Sunday afternoon soccer ball after too many beers. But empathy is the greatest and most demanding attribute. It is humankind's greatest gift and our gnarliest curse, because empathize is a verb and requires action. Even if we're born with an instinct to empathize, which we are, we're also born with an instinct to kill. So which of these innate drivers will we embody? Where on the vast spectrum between them do we fall? But all this aside, actors are empaths. They are required to enact the verb. Some are good at it and some are not, in everyone's esteem, but don't pretend we don't judge. They are all brave, and most will move the dial to the most dangerous end of that empathy to killing spectrum in order to be honest about who we are. They'll fall on their sword for you. I sound lofty. I sound lofty, sound high-minded, a little. I understand, but I'll just counter with this. You try it. And here I give you my thought experiment for the evening. Shakespeare was an actor, and I propose it's this fact alone that makes him the great writer he was. Any writer can learn or imitate form. Any writer can observe and articulate. So many writers stir the senses with imagery. So many can shock and move. Many writers get as close to human nature as possible, and many writers kick you in the chest with their astute retelling of the fallibilities of humankind. But this writer was great because he was an actor. He wrote what he knew he wouldn't be afraid to stand on stage and feel. Act 2. I am the best of them that speak this speech. A short clarification. I'm not saying that playwrights need to be actors to be great. I'm saying actors who are playwrights have the ability to put character at the forefront of a story. And through the character, the story of the play emerges. It could even be said that Shakespeare wrote great characters, even more so than great plays, and that he altered the course of acting by putting the psychological process on stage. Some plays are great because their author has a personal understanding of a particular class, culture, or social background, and explores issues related that are illuminating. Some writers are great, some plays are great rather, because the author might successfully dramatize an event that actually happened and build a narrative around that. Some writers adapt old myths brilliantly and investigate timeless human behavior that way. I think Shakespeare must have been a really brave actor because he wrote characters that carved new neural pathways right before the audience's eyes. The art of the actor is their ability to slowly reveal the character through their own humanity. The suspense of many of Shakespeare's plays is in watching these characters decide their fate through thought and right before our eyes. Brutus from Julius Caesar. It must be by his death. And for my part, I know no personal cause to spurn him, but for the general. He would be crowned. How that might change his nature, there's the question. It is the bright day that brings forth the adder, and that craves wary walking. Crown him that, and then I grant we put a sting in him that at his will he may do danger with. Or Phoebe from As You Like It. Think not I love him, though I ask for him. 'Tis but a peevish boy, yet he talks well. But what care I for words? Yet words do well when he that speaks them pleases those that hear. It is a pretty youth, but not very pretty. But sure, he's proud, and yet his pride becomes him. They work it out right in front of us. This is what the professor and literary critic Harold Bloom meant when he said that Shakespeare invented the human on stage. Having said all this, I think there are several plays by Shakespeare that may never need to be performed again. Act 3, all that glitters is not gold. There are plays in the canon that require deep consideration. This section is like it's written in my blood. It was knotty to write. As to what their value is for an audience, when new plays can offer greater insight, inclusivity, or understanding of the world we live in now. Some of the plays are deeply problematic by today's political, social, and even psychological standards, given the negative impact any media can have on vulnerable people. But do they represent Shakespeare's own worldview or his view of the world? Is it his opinion, or is he representing the opinion of the people of his time? Is he creating the problem, or is he illuminating the problem? The answer to these questions directly impacts how we move forward with performing Shakespeare. I don't have those answers, but I'm going to offer a method that we could use to find them. Almost like as if they were programmed, we were doing a workshop for a new play. This is by no means foolproof and not necessarily comprehensible, but I'm going to forge ahead, so bear with me. Okay, we need to apply a dramaturgical process to the plays with actors, a director, a dramaturg, like a workshop. And this is before it's programmed. If anything found in the play hurts, degrades, or shames or mocks a woman, racially diverse character, sexually diverse character, any character with a disability or disabilities, any person within our society who has or does struggle with equality or acceptance without that behavior being held to account, then it is the opinion of the play. And we can assume that Shakespeare either held that view himself and or he was commissioned to write for someone who did. Both are a problem. If any maligned character is only given vengeance as a means to counteract the injustice against them, and no other solution is provided, then the play is reinforcing a harmful paradigm. Once these assessments have been made, give the play to actors, actors who would feasibly be cast in any of the roles that are on stage authentically. For example, if there is a disabled character within the context, cast a disabled actor. The feedback you're going to get will be expert and experienced. And if they feel they would be degraded or personally taxed in a harmful way by doing the play, let it go. If that actor feels they could bring valuable experience to shed new light on the work and or feel empowered by encountering the role, forge ahead. Then an experiment in editing can be performed on the play. If particular text that could potentially lead to any people watching it to feel vilified, excluded, shamed, or othered, and it can be excised, removed, or deleted with the original intention of the play remaining intact, take the next step. The text should then be read at a workshop in front of people who might give really valuable feedback. as to whether the stories, storylines, characters in that play could be harmful. And if they read it or if they hear it and they believe the issue is resolved by the edits and the story is still told with integrity, then move forward. If they don't, if they feel like it could offend people in a way that is harmful, let it go. People don't need to be traumatized or hurt by going to the theatre or performing in theatre. Yes, this is a lengthy process, and you could almost argue that the draft of a new play could be written in that time. But we want to keep Shakespeare, so we need to be prepared to let go of what no longer serves his memory and what no longer serves our theatrical landscape now. There are many of his plays that companies rarely perform because they think they're just obscure or weird, like King John or Timon of Athens, or they were criticised by George Bernard Shaw or Samuel Johnson, like Cymbeline. So people are already cherry picking what should be performed and what shouldn't based on their own assessment of what an audience might like. What's almost irrefutable is that Shakespeare was writing with and for his actors. The plays were in their time and they were of their time. Any doubts or questions about their subjects and themes would have been discussed and decided on within the context of theatrical collaboration. Maybe some of the actors agreed and disagreed, but the discussions would have been happening. Just like when many new plays are workshopped or rehearsed now, before they're programmed, before they're performed. We have the opportunity to apply similar processes to historic plays before they're programmed. We take what we want from Shakespeare's plays, which don't require any royalties at all, ever. They're historical plays. We are not creating them. We just choose which ones we do. Therefore, to bring home my point, I'm going to give you a few synopses of stories that if they were pitched today, would they get programmed? Little extra thought experiment. A heroic black general appoints an inexperienced young soldier as his lieutenant, based on his potential, and overlooks his friend and long-serving counterpart. Out of jealousy, this friend sets about plotting the downfall of the general by implicating his young white wife in an affair with the new lieutenant. The general, who is not approved of by his wife's father, falls for the lies really easily. Despite her declarations of love and loyalty, he does not believe his wife's desperate pleas of innocence. He beats her and calls her a whore and eventually kills her. Realizing his mistake, he cries a lot and kills himself. The perception of him as brutal and unworthy of his wife is reinforced in the outcome of this play. Iago, the white puppet master who set things in motion, kills his own wife for exposing his deception, but not before Othello, the black general, can change the course of destiny or save his innocent wife. A merchant makes a deal with a Jewish moneylender. The merchant needs money to lend his best mate, who needs it to offer to the father of a rich young woman he wants to marry. The deal is that if the merchant doesn't repay the debt on time, the Jew will take a pound of flesh. The money is borrowed, marriage goes ahead, then the merchant's deals fall through. He ends up in court for his debt. But it's the Jewish man who ends up publicly shamed, forced to give up all his money to the merchant and the state of Venice, and required to convert to Christianity. A woman marries a man whose sole aim in the marriage is the taming of her. She's considered unmarriable, a shrew. He succeeds and falls in love with his tamed wife, and they live happily ever after. A privileged young white man is summoned home from college when his father dies. His uncle marries his newly grieved mother. Then he sees his father's ghost, who tells him he was murdered by the uncle. The young man goes mad trying to prove this, and in the process assaults his girlfriend, who takes her own life, shames and belittles his vulnerable and grief-stricken mother, and causes the downfall of Denmark. Just in case it's not abundantly clear, that last one is Hamlet. But I'm going to argue for Hamlet. Act 3. Though this be madness, yet there is method in't. In February, I began directing 11 female identifying actors on a student production of Hamlet. It was one of the most satisfying experiences of my career. I was asked to choose a play by the Bard, and I chose Hamlet, with some notable exceptions such as Macbeth, As You Like It, Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. The plays of Shakespeare's provide insubstantial, often naive or lightweight roles for women. Women weren't allowed on stage, and that was the reason their inclusion in stories is scant, because it was hard to find men who could believably play female parts. Shakespeare wrote for his actors rather than to represent the society as at large. In most of his plays, if the female roles are strong and complex, they don't have a whole lot to do. And a lot of what they do is in support of man. So I chose Hamlet because, in my humble opinion, it contains his greatest writing. There is problematic behavior, but I see it as in service of self-revelation, and the consequences are immediately obvious. Also, in Hamlet, every character gets a good bit. We had 3 Hamlets and 2 Claudiuses, so parts were evenly distributed and they still all got good bits. Polonius and Laertes became female in this version, and the text really supported it. We discussed other pronoun changes, and over the course of a couple of weeks, we decided to keep the rest as they were, or in the case of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, make it a little bit ambiguous. So it was a company of female actors telling the story of Hamlet, just as a company of male actors would have told the story in the time it was written. By virtue of our actors being women, they brought their inescapable feminine traits to the characters, which gave them texture and depth. Hamlet's psyche is like a secret closet space, and that space is most often taken up by men. But in that space, he has conversations with the gods, and the writing is so playable, so sayable. It's deep and fun and frightening. And I wanted to give the women the most satisfying experience of the text that the unit of Shakespeare for their study could provide. There is no documentation of this Hamlet. We weren't permitted to film it, even for archival purposes. I wish we'd found a way to do so. Not because it needs to be seen, but so we'd have evidence that this experience existed. Now I have had one moment of perhaps understanding Shakespeare as well as I ever will. When it came to showing the work, I sat there witnessing the courage of the actors, thinking, gosh, I wish there was a way of recording this forever. And I bet Shakespeare thought that a lot. I've had teachers or directors who've said the actor, in a real moment of being within the character, becomes possessed by them. I'd say it's the other way around. I think the character becomes possessed by the actor playing them, and the actor becomes more themselves than ever before. A vulnerability fills the room. The other actors know it. Their teachers and witnesses know it. It is undeniable. And some people won't like it. They won't like what it reveals about the world through the actor. The actor is then doubly vulnerable, but they get up again. They stand in the wings with the hollow sound of judgment in their minds, then walk on stage to once again lend that character their courage. The writing in Hamlet is great enough to give actors the gift of courage. Working with those student actors was the biggest thrill. They were immersed in the acting process all day, every day, and were supported by experts in voice and movement, so they brought immediate learning to their performance. The showings we did had no public audience outcome. They were just for faculty and peers, so the students were liberated from thinking they must arrive at a fixed performance, which can trap even the most experienced performer. They could make mistake after mistake, right up until the unit was complete. But because they'd applied themselves with fullness to the process, wrestling with it and hating it, and probably me sometimes, but staying present in the learning, the performance was entirely secondary. They'd already shone. I repeated to the point of madness in rehearsals that if a play can't be compelling before sets, before costume, then we aren't there yet. If you can watch actors doing a run in the rehearsal room and be swept away, If the electricity blows out or the production truck goes missing, they could, in theory, get up on stage and give people their money's worth. Regardless, and when it comes to the work of playwrights before 1600, set consisted of a painted backdrop or elevated levels to play on. Props consisted only of what was vital to the storytelling: a stagger, a sword, paper, the odd drinking receptacle, or sometimes blood and offal, depending on how gruesome the action. Masks were used, some costume, particularly for men playing women. These were the rules we employed for our Hamlet, myself and this troupe of she-hers. They wore what we imagined women would rehearse in: big skirts, corsets, blouses, pantaloon underwear, if they were allowed to act back when Hamlet was written. We had about 5 props between them, and then we imagined how the women would embody the roles of men. Would they mock them? Sometimes. Would they perform masculinity? Sometimes. Would they honor their plight? Often. For the most part, would they find a way to enact the cruelty, the shaming of women, even when it ground against every fiber of their gender? Always. There is what we now call misogyny sprinkled throughout Hamlet. The difference between this play and some of the ones I listed earlier is the behavior and attitudes are in no way celebrated or even endorsed beyond their inclusion, in my opinion. Rather, they demonstrate the pathetic lows a human might stoop to when their own ego is running the show of their lives. Hamlet himself is not easy to love, and the writing rarely, if ever, in my opinion, makes him a hero. Shakespeare delivers the words directly from Hamlet's mouth that he will behave as terribly as a human could in the service of uncovering the truth about his father's death. And there are consequences around every corner. The merciless quest to prove oneself right can feel like a necessity in one's head, but in practice, the art of letting go is the only truly noble path. Hamlet learns this too late to turn back, as many do. It's humanity's great lesson. It's why check your privilege is an apt adage of today too, because the choice to behave terribly makes a mockery of those who have no choice but to fight, grapple, argue, struggle, sometimes kill for their livelihood. Hamlet is a spiritual play, and in the minds, hands, mouths, and bodies of this all-female identifying ensemble, the essentially feminine qualities of tenderness, humility, nurture, resilience, emotionality, and physical strength and endurance, Hamlet's ego was not protected, not forgiven, not argued for or defended, not excused. But it was challenging and unpalatable at times for the actors to dig into. It was hard work initially, as a lot of Hamlet's actions did not come easily to those women. So when they finally embodied it, grabbed it, seized it, were unapologetic, it was surprising, energized, and risky. And I could see the flaws of humanity through the story again. Not just a grieving yet spoiled man, treating people badly. As the actors stripped off their feminine adornments throughout the 90 minutes and we were left on stage in gender-neutral undergarments, it became obvious, without pushing, without agenda, without asking the play to be something it wasn't, that everyone and anyone is capable of humankind's greatest flaws at any moment. We are all capable of terrible acts of violence and betrayal if our own suffering is great enough. It's the proverbial roll of the dice. Hamlet holds up. In it, we witness humanity wrestling with itself on stage, dark nights of the soul. In theatres, we need to be horrified, arrested. We need to laugh at our own expense too, absolutely, as long as it's in the service of revelation and unity, in the service of seeking enlightenment. You might not get there, but you could seek it. In the service of mending hearts that ache, in the service of love. 5. Now I will believe that there are unicorns. The most common thing you'll hear an educator say about Shakespeare when taught in schools, and it's true, is Shakespeare's words weren't written to be read. They were written to be spoken out loud. And that's when you really feel their humanity, their magic, their beauty, or something to that effect. Well, I'd suggest this could be said of every single playwright, but I pondered it. And I think when a playwright is also a performer, they are deeply attuned to the rhythm of human speech, to where humans innately need to draw breath when they're speaking. I imagine these playwrights probably say their lines aloud as they're writing them. Our contemporary rhythms are deceptively simple. Sometimes a writer's style is almost invisible, but that is a mark of brilliance too. Capturing something so it sounds so real to us and lacing the poetry in like an illicit substance so it creeps up on us and knocks us out. So actors who write plays often write amazing plays. Likewise, Shakespeare adopted a writing style familiar in his time, much more shameless in structure. The rhymes, the alliteration, the metaphor are poured out like so many pints of beer till the audience is drunk on language and disarmed by the audacity of this historical norm. Soliloquies invite the audience to breach the stage and enter the theatre of it all. But his style wasn't necessarily his genius. It was the playground the time afforded him to cavort in. It was his phrasing and imagery that was his genius, that was singular to him, uniquely his. No one saw the world like he did, as no one ever sees the world in the same way without nuance. And he wrote it down, and with it laid his soul beside it. He leads the actors to each breath as though he is holding their hand the whole way. He mixes it up between poetry and prose, depending on status, intelligence, class, etc. And surely this was so he and the other actors could have a shorthand access into the character's psychological state. They knew if they saw verse, it meant X, if prose, it meant Y. Little wonder then, when he's spoken of in reverent tones and an air of awe, it's his writing that he's marveled about. It's all we have physical evidence of. Yet people argue over how such a person of no nobility, of no great education to speak of, could have possibly penned such greatness. People even dispute he even wrote them at all. They don't think him capable. So I'm offering the answer because he's an actor. In 1592, all the theatres in London were closed as a plague broke out and wreaked havoc on the world of live performance. In the 7 years prior, Shakespeare is considered lost, having no evidentiary documentation to cover his movements. Some say he was sourcing plot lines for the plays he would eventually write. Some believe he was on a journey of self-discovery outside the confines of his marriage. Some suggest he was actually home, intermittently undertaking employment for his family. All are plausible and all might have been true to some extent. Who knows, and who will ever know? Can we ever really say what is fact about the people we revere? We hold them to high account and bestow revels upon them as if they would care, but we don't know. We have a preferred opinion about what is possible, and that opinion will be based on our own preferences and biases, but we don't know. People defend his work as though on his behalf. There is a spirit to defend or offend. Maybe it dies another death every time his writing is commended and remembered, but not his acting. On the off chance that that's the case, I'm here to memorialize the actor. I'm not wrong in suggesting, and many sources support this assertion, that he was employed in the craft of acting through those lost years, working, honing. Given the lack of any true proof and even very little documentation on Shakespeare's life in general, I feel okay with saying maybe he was dabbling in writing plays through this period, trying his hand at it. But with no significant work published until after 1592, I believe it's fair to posit that it was acting that drew the passionate young bard into the theatre. And yet, he's remembered as a writer, not an actor. William Shakespeare, one of the greatest writers that ever lived, and often described as arguably the world's greatest ever playwright. And his acting is barely mentioned now, no records. I have a theory as to why writing is considered a respectable art form. It's considered a respectable art form and acting is not. Actors might be admired and coveted. They're obsessed over and celebrated, but that's their identity in the public space. It's not the art of acting. The old stalwarts of the stage are beloved by die-hard theatre goers, but the public don't really care until they're Gandalf or M or the original voice of Mufasa or Voldemort. Did I say that right? Celebrity identity is a real commodity, but the craft of acting is not. And only people on the inside in some way know how hard it is, beyond doing stunts for a movie. The best acting happens with barely any demonstration of the effort it took to create. This can be said of many art forms, but a record is left of those. And unless there is documentation, it's historically debatable as to whether an acting performance happened at all. Even within the experience, as an actor, I've often finished a play and thought, was that a dream? And gosh, I wish there was a way of recording this forever. Whereas writing, like music, like painting, is at least evidence of a skill, evidence of an art, proof the artist existed. So Shakespeare's remembered, more memorialized as a writer. Fair enough, but he was the writer he was because of the actor he was. Soul of the age, the applause, delight, the wonder of our stage. He was not of an age, but for all time. The wonder of our stage, soul of the age. So often this compliment written about him, I think at his death, is attributed to his skills as a playwright. But listen again, soul of the age, the wonder of our stage. And in the list of players at the front of the first folio, published by his fellow players, whom he'd trod the boards with for at least 2 decades, he was given top position when it was first published after his death. Whether this was to flatter his memory is not important. He was an actor of the highest order in their esteem. So back to those lost years. He was already writing. He had publicly declared his own verse was something to be seen, but he wasn't prolific as a writer yet, and not well known in that regard. The lost years ended when he turned up as an actor in London in 1592. In 1592, all the theatres were shut down because of a plague epidemic. And according to the best, most reliable sources, they remained shut until 1594. It's thought he, the writer Shakespeare, turned to poetry at this time because no new plays were in demand. There are 2 long-form poems known to be by Shakespeare, Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece. He has a few other poems floating around, and he did write 154 sonnets between 1592 and 1598, but sonnets are only 14 lines long. Surely that's not all he wrote in 2 years. According to the Folger Shakespeare Library, there are at least 38 plays by Shakespeare, and some believe that that's only half of what he actually ended up writing. Over a period of about 20 years, huge plays, epics. But for 2 years, it's proposed he turned away from plays. For me, it's more likely in this thought experiment, knowing actors the way I know actors, that he, the actor Shakespeare, didn't turn away from writing plays because the theatres were closed down. It finally forced him to turn fully toward plays because he knew the theatre would need them when theatre came back. And theatre will always come back. There were several plays ready to go, several near completion, and they landed on the London stage after the plague. So, the restless soul of a performer, laid off unwittingly, an art you cannot practice alone, that relies on the mirror neuron response of an audience to truly exist, without a project, kicking about all this energy and understanding, courage and muscle, breath and beingness, all this life all this empathy left to stasis. So what do the poor players do when their craft can't be practiced and they live in a state of suspended inspiration? They despair. They feel useless and worthless and a bit silly for being part of the pageantry that so many take for granted when they can see it. They seek other employment. They distract themselves with friends and wine. They pick up a brush or a pick or a pen. They sit with the knowledge that it's possible no one will ever care to see or read or hear. Then they do the only thing they know to do. They act, take action, apply the brushstroke, chart the chord, and for Shakespeare and many before and after him, put pen to paper. Let their humanity fill pages instead of stages. They think, all that hope, all those dreams, all that passion and opinion I have inside me, all that time spent observing and imitating, of making people laugh and cry with me. Maybe I've got something to say. Maybe I need to say it. Maybe I need to put it out there, hope for the best, let go of my fears. Even if it's for that one person at the back of the auditorium, I will overcome every temptation to feel like I'm irrelevant. Shakespeare said, "Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them." Shakespeare was a great actor. I can feel it in my bones, which is evidence as good as anyone else has ever presented. The time to write was thrust upon him, so he seized it. And in doing so, the actor became the writer.